All praises to the Most High, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rahahakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in His truth in all sincerity. Psalms 127, verse 1, and I'm going to read this in the NLT. A song for pilgrims ascending to Jerusalem, a psalm of Solomon. Unless Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai builds a house, the work of the builders is wasted. Unless Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai protects a city, guarding it with sentries will do no good.
What going, brethren? U.S. government has come out for Jamaica now. They're threatening Jamaica. Says the Jamaican government must stop China's growing influence in the country, or we will. In other words, cut the Chinese off, or we gonna invade and bomb the shit out of y'all and kick the Chinese out. And this is crazy. But yeah, I don't even know, because here's the thing: the alternative for them is American influence or British influence or Israeli influence as opposed to Chinese influence. The Chinese are no better. We see what they're doing in Jamaica. They're no different. They're no better. No group is treating us better. The Africans, stop saying, oh, no group is better. Everyone treats us like shit. Everyone looks at us like shit. The question is, how long are we going to keep doing this shit, man?
So the individual in this video is basically saying that the U.S., aka Mystery Babylon, is now issuing an ultimatum to Jamaica to stop doing business with China, or essentially there will be consequences. And of course, we remember what happened with the U.S. and Venezuela earlier this year. I believe that was late January, as well as the U.S. and Cuba, now with the U.S. recently imposing sanctions on Cuba for its continued business dealings with China. So we have the U.S. now essentially threatening Jamaica because of their business ties with China. So let's just go into these business ties real fast and see exactly what it is here that China is doing in Jamaica. And this is off of Google AI Overview. China's business involvement in Jamaica primarily spans infrastructure development, bilateral trade, maritime logistics, and auto imports. As part of the Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese enterprises are reshaping several key sectors of the Jamaican economy. Infrastructure and construction, Chinese firms like China Harbor Engineering Company, or CHEC, have spearheaded major projects, including the North-South Highway and various urban development and housing projects. Port and maritime logistics, state-owned China Merchants Port Holdings controls the Kingston Freeport Terminal, positioning Jamaica as a strategic hub for Caribbean trade. Automotive market, Chinese auto brands are booming in Jamaica. For example, the SUV brand Jator quickly became the top-selling new vehicle brand in the country. Trade and resource extraction, China primarily exports raw materials like bauxite to China. In return, Chinese businesses export industrial machinery, electronics, and consumer textiles to Jamaica. And that bauxite is needed for artificial intelligence, which at the current moment, China leads the world in that particular industry, with the U.S. right behind. A few months back, I did a video going into the purposes of aluminum and bauxite and why it's needed for AI. And with China basically leading the world once again in AI technology, at least for the time being right now, this is one of the main reasons why they are in Jamaica, helping them with infrastructure, because they have a particular resource that they need to continue to lead the world in AI technology. Lastly, fisheries and exports. The two nations have agreements allowing Jamaican companies such as Rainforest Seafoods to export spiny lobster and other fisheries to the large Chinese consumer market. I'll stop there. I want to go back to Psalms 127 and 1, my opening verse. This time I'm going to read it I'll read it once again in the NLT. Unless Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai builds a house, the work of the builders is wasted. Unless Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai protects a city, guarding it with sentries will do no good. Exactly. And so no matter what it is right now, whatever business dealings that the politicians of Jamaica are conducting with China, just as it says in this particular scripture right here, unless the Most High Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai does it himself, all of this is going to be, it's going to basically come to nothing. It's not going to materialize. This is not going to happen because it's done in unrighteousness. It's done for the purposes of this particular resource that China needs in order to carry forth, to move forward, I should say, with its AI ambitions. So, but these are basically China and US, I should say, are two nuclear powers, and they're both in a race here to lead the world in not only AI technology, but also brain chip technology. So both of these countries are needing to gather as many natural resources as possible for this type of technology to actually be able to sustain itself. In order to be able to use this technology, it needs a whole lot of natural resources, and that's what this is all about here. Babylon obviously doesn't want a nuclear ready China doing any type of long-term business, I should say, with any country in this hemisphere, and that's really what this is. It's just like several decades ago when you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the U.S. did not want Russia setting up shop right there in Cuba. Cuba's about 90 miles away from Florida, and that's just too close for this country's enemies to be conducting business. And so what ends up happening is just like what happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the U.S. and Russia came within minutes, or some would even say seconds, of actually launching nukes at each other. It's going to basically be the same thing again. This time around, though, it looks like it's, China and the U.S., because China is on this hemisphere doing business, and the U.S. feels like they don't want one of their enemies this close to them, so they look at that as a threat. I'm going to go into this article. It's a fairly short article, so I'll read the whole thing here. And this is off of a website called Our Today. The Jamaican government must stop China's growing influence in the country, or we will. And this was published on June 24th, 2026. The U.S. government is making it clear that it will not tolerate China's growing presence in Jamaica, and that the Asian powerhouse poses a threat to the American mainland. U.S. Senator John Curtis went on record saying that China's ownership of Jamaican ports, infrastructure, and telecommunication systems has implications for American national security. Many U.S. politicians, particularly those supportive of the Trump administration, are of the view that the Jamaican government is pally with the CCP, and that should be checked. Over the last decade, China has invested over $5 billion in Jamaica, granting loans at low interest rates, building modern highways, constructed hospitals. Chinese companies have done well in Jamaica. Although the U.S. is Jamaica's leading trading partner, its direct investment, according to the International Trade Administration, was in U.S. dollars $276 million in 2023, concentrated in tourism, energy, and telecommunications. China has invested far more in Jamaica than the United States, which in effect has not stepped up and seen Jamaica's potential. It is a disparity that is causing tension, and it will call for a great diplomatic skills on the part of Jamaica as it looks not to agitate both China and America. China is a world power and an example to countries like Jamaica that they can go from developing low income status to becoming a developed state in a generation. And that's basically, Jamaica is looking at that, and that seems like a good idea. That seems like, oh man, in one generation we can become a fledgling, booming economy here with the help of China. And of course, that's what it is also. The U.S. wants the tribes to be weak. There's at no time does the U.S. ever want to see Judah, Benjamin, Levi, or any of the northern tribes, Ephraim, Simeon, all the way down, Gad, Reuben. He doesn't want to see the northern tribes prosperous. So with China basically telling Jamaica that in one generation, you can go from low income status to becoming a developed state, Jamaica sees that, the politicians sees that, and I'm pretty sure they're making whatever little under table deals that they can make with China as well. They're becoming probably really rich behind this. They're giving China access to do this type of stuff here in their particular country, which is pretty much pissing off Nero and Babylon here. So let's continue with the article. Prime Minister Holness has stated on a number of occasions that the development and modernization of China remains a top priority and that he welcomes investment in a multipolar world. President Trump has tapped his friend and ally, Carrie Lake, to be the next U.S. ambassador to Jamaica, as she has said that on her agenda is diminishing China's presence in Jamaica and getting more American companies to come to the country. It's like pick your poison at that point. Speaking at a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing, Lake said, if you're not putting out your story, somebody else is. The Americans have done such great work with our partners in Jamaica. They're neighbors. We have a great relationship. Culturally, we are more similar to China than to Jamaica, and we need to tell the people what we're doing. We were on the ground in massive numbers after the hurricane. I'm going to read something one more time. If you're not putting out your story, somebody else is. The Americans have done such great work with our partners in Jamaica. They're neighbors. We have a great relationship. Culturally, we are more similar to China than to Jamaica, and we need to tell the people what we're doing. We were on the ground in massive numbers after the hurricane. The U.S. military carried out 133 flights in the hours after the hurricane struck, and we brought in almost 480 out of 500 humanitarian relief workers. We brought in search and rescue crews and heavy equipment to move debris off roads. Entire communities were cut off, and sadly there were 45 deaths and many others were hurt. 250,000 people were displaced and needed housing. America was there. We need to tell that story. We will continue to be there, but we cannot continue to watch as China makes huge moves right in our front yard. Prime Minister Andrew Holness has repeatedly said that China is a friend and strategic partner making tremendous contributions to the Jamaican economy. Jamaica has to take better care in choosing its friends. We will not tolerate China using Jamaica as a staging post to threaten us. Pretty much just what I said when you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was pretty much the same type of jargon, the same type of rhetoric being used, where the U.S. kept saying we will not basically have Cuba doing business with Russia this close to the United States mainland. And so, we're seeing the same thing taking place here, but this time just with China and Jamaica. I'll read that one more time. Jamaica has to take better care in choosing its friends. We will not tolerate China using Jamaica as a staging post to threaten us. Close to 75% of Jamaican tourists came from America. Jamaicans hunger for a U.S. visa, and most of Jamaica's remittances come from America. It will be a shame to see all of that stop because your government made the wrong choice. Jamaica can't take both America and China to the prom. It's just like the scriptures say, a man cannot have two masters. So Jamaica can't take both America and China to the prom. It has to choose one and live by its decision. Carrie Lake will straighten things out down there, and Jamaica will do as she says if it knows what is in its best interest. So that's basically a threat right there. Jamaica will do, Carrie Lake will straighten things out down there, and Jamaica will do as she says if it knows what's in its best interest. So they're talking real big smack here. The U.S. is always talking like this. It's always these type of threats. And, this wasn't even a veiled threat. That's basically an out. If somebody tells you, you better do this if you know what's best for you, that's a threat, So like I mentioned earlier, it's just like what happened in Venezuela earlier this year. It's just like what we saw in Cuba. Basically the U.S. is throwing their weight around again on much smaller nations, much weaker nations. And this is only temporary. This type of stuff here is going to come to a screeching halt real fast here. So she's not coming to smile sweetly, do the cocktail circuit, drink rum and cokes, and eat jerk chicken. You see how they talking here? I'll read this one more time. Carrie Lake will straighten things out down there, and Jamaica will do as she says if it knows what is in its best interest. She's not coming to smile sweetly, do the cocktail circuit, drink rum and cokes, and eat jerk chicken. We want to see more American businesses in Jamaica and the government there extend the hand of true friendship to us. Your true partner, said Gordon Parsons, who has worked with the American First Policy Institute. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that Jamaica has fallen into debt trap diplomacy with all the Chinese investments and is naive to China's predatory practices. He notes that China's government subsidies companies underbid the competition and won all contracts. He says he wants to see a level playing field. And this is what I mentioned earlier. It's like, you basically pick your poison here, China has their own, underhanded, shady business tactics, just like the U.S. does. So it's not necessarily that Marco Rubio is lying here or even hating on China right here. He's probably 100% telling the truth that China has some real shady business practices, but this has nothing to do with that. If Jamaica was a small island right off the coast of China, the U.S. wouldn't care if Jamaica was helping them with infrastructure and that type of stuff. This is all about the fact that Jamaica is on this side of in this particular hemisphere, too close to the U.S. Jamaica has bauxite, which is needed for AI development. That is one of the primary resources needed, and China is right there getting that in exchange for, helping them with their infrastructure and some other stuff going on in the country once again. So China has not interfered in the affairs of state in Jamaica and stresses it wants to help with the development of economy as a friend to the country. Jamaica is an independent sovereign state, and Prime Minister Andrew Holness has made the point that we no longer live in a bipolar world. Donald Trump is not the only powerful leader in the world. Today we live in a multipolar world. Prime Minister Andrew Holness frames Jamaica's foreign policy as a strategic tool to secure economic independence and attract international investment. His intention is not to incur the wrath of the Trump administration, but rather to make Jamaica an attractive destination for investment. Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba were all independent sovereign countries, but look at them now. China's foothold in Jamaica is non-negotiable and a threat to our national security. Jamaica has allowed Huawei to control its telecommunication systems. Its major port is owned by the Chinese. It isn't hard to tell that this is a clear risk, and Jamaica is thumbing its nose at us. What we will do is ensure the protection of our homeland. We will not countenance a Chinese vassal state on our doorstep. And this is exactly the type of rhetoric that was used once again during the Cuban Missile Crisis between the United States, Cuba, and Russia. We will not countenance a Chinese vassal state on our doorstep, said researcher Christopher Herbert of the American Enterprise Institute. And that is the end of this particular article here. So I just want to go back to this first sentence of the last paragraph. Venezuela, Iran, and Cuba were all independent sovereign countries, but look at them now. And like I mentioned earlier, these dudes are talking real big. This is what they're doing. The damage that they leave in their wake. They're bragging about it. You basically go in here, bomb the crap out of Venezuela, snatch up their president, and take over their oil. You basically threaten Cuba with the same thing. You went in there and you try to do the same thing with Iran. So this is exactly what the scriptures tell us. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to go straight to as a matter of fact, I'm looking through my notes here. I think I may have skipped something. These well, I'll circle back around to it on this particular part here. But like I was mentioning, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, these particular things here. Now you're also, you're seeing what's happening in this country. You have those three, and these are outside of Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, these are the northern tribes here. And you're seeing the same thing happen over here, with, of course, Reuben and Gad, they're kind of lumped in with Judah. Even though we know that Reuben and Gad are the northern tribes, Judah is the southern tribe. So we kind of see that they're lumped in together basically as black Americans. So, and this is what we're seeing, Venezuela, Cuba, Judah, Reuben, Gad, and now we also have Levi, so it was the recent events that's happening here where their TPS status is basically, the U.S. is basically say, time is up. It's time for you to go home now, and, we can see, right now they're turning up the heat, the U.S. right now is starting to turn the heat up a little bit on the tribes. And, we're right here, this is, we're right here at the beginning stages of, we're not actually in the beginning stages, but we're still like in the early chapters of Jacob's trouble right here. We're going to basically see this devil unleash a whole lot of fury because he feels like his empire is being threatened. The possibility of this man's kingdom going down is on his mind every day. No matter how much he might get up here and say, hey, we made America great again, that possibility is on his mind. The possibility that at any moment this place is going to collapse, it's going to fall, and he knows that. This is why, he's taking these measures now as far as, immigration reform, as far as all of these particular things that we see happening right here before the 250th birthday of this particular country here, Babylon. This coming Saturday, if I'm correct, is July 4th. So he's ramping things up. And even though Babylon's beef is with Moab, we see right now Benjamin is caught right in the middle of that. Really, his beef is really with the tribes. That is his whole thing, is to keep his foot on the tribe's neck. And for the simple fact, it looks like Moab is kind of doing business with Benjamin. That's pissing the U.S. off. So the U.S. is really mad at Benjamin, but it's because Moab is there. Benjamin is caught right in the middle of that. So I'm going to go to Revelation 12 and 12 real fast here. I want to read this in the NLT. Therefore, Salakia. Therefore, rejoice, O heavens, and you who live in the heavens, rejoice. But terror will come on the earth and the sea, For the devil has come down to you in great anger, knowing that he has little time. And that's exactly what it is. We're going to see right now, every single time, one of these countries in South America or Central America, anytime China tries to do business with them, the U.S. knows it's because China's after their resources, and the U.S. does not want China to win this AI race. So right now, this has kind of got the U.S. on edge, that not only is China a nuclear power, not only are they allied with Russia and South Korea, other nuclear powers. Back during World War II, the U.S. didn't have this to worry about. Now they actually do. So when you see that these particular countries in this hemisphere are actually doing business with this country's enemies now, this is going to cause this devil to come down with great wrath, just like it says here in Revelation 12:12, and I'm going to also go into Jeremiah 30 verses 7 and 8 in the NLT. In all history, there has never been such a time of terror. It will be a time of trouble for my people Israel. Yet in the end, they will be saved. For in that day, says Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai of heaven's armies, I will break the yoke from their necks and snap their chains. Foreigners will no longer be their masters. In this particular case, Benjamin is not going to have to worry about, this is, like I said, we're coming right up. We're still in the early chapters here of Jacob's trouble, but we're almost at the very end of the book here, so just to use that as an analogy. But we're at that point now where we're seeing right now how the tribes are getting caught up. We're caught right in the middle of these larger nations, these larger powerful nations. These are nuclear capable nations as well. The tribes are caught right in the middle of this stuff here. So so we're pretty much sitting ducks here, and this is why we pray every day for the Most High Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai to to return and to deliver us from this. But like it says here, and that's exactly what it says. It will be a time of trouble for my people Israel, yet in the end they will be saved. For in that day, says Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai of heaven's armies, I will break the yoke from their necks and snap their chains. Foreigners will no longer be their masters. I'm going to end right there. I pray this has been edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.